But somebody asked me a little earlier, how did Mae Brussell get started? She was really my mentor. I mean, I started doing research earlier than I knew of her, but I was already fairly deep into it when her first article was printed in The Realist that I used to subscribe to, called "Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped?" that broke down the entire command structure of Watergate that wouldn't come out for 2 or 3 years, you know, and also had a little trailer on the end about how Nixon came to power and his connections with the Nazis. And I was already tracking the Nazis in covert operations, so I got in touch with it. But she started back in '63, and she was a housewife of a doctor, living a fairly good lifestyle. She was her father was Rabbi Magnin, one of the leading reform rabbis in Los Angeles, and pretty famous. He got on Johnny Carson and stuff. And she had gone to study architecture. She liked Frank Lloyd Wright at Stanford, and she married this doctor, and they were living in a nice house up in the hills above Carmel by the sea. And she had 5 kids, but at that point, I don't think they were all born yet, but her daughter Bonnie was 5 at that point. And she liked Kennedy, and she saw Kennedy killed, and then her daughter Bonnie was watching the TV that weekend and saw Oswald brought out, beat up, and went in her room and wrapped her teddy bear up to send Ali Harvey Oswald, which I think it shows some of Mae's kind of compassion about the world. But then the daughter came out after wrapping the teddy bear and saw Oswald shot on television, and Mae thought, what kind of a world am I bringing my kids into? And so she started doing her clips and her research, and she found other people. And a lot of the beginnings of this research, it's not really acknowledged too much, but it should be, was women. Maggie Fields, Lillian Castellano, Mae Brussell, Sylvia Marr, and they were...
radio show in California.
Yeah, she eventually did a radio show called World Watchers 853, and you can get all of them now for about $50 on DVDs, and believe me, it's worth it. It's a treasure trove of information. What she was talking about when she died at the end of the 80s is still coming true. She predicted Reagan, coming into the presidency. She handed Rose 10 years ahead. She handed Rose Kennedy a note 5 days before Bobby was killed and said the people that killed John are moving on your son in California. Because she was tracking them. She cross-referenced, indexed the entire Warren Commission volumes. 8,000 pages. And, she understood who they were, and she was watching where they went, and tracking them. So she would break the news down every week in these shows. She called her World Watchers. She wanted to be like Weight Watchers. She thought other housewives would clip their papers and send her stuff, and, it would be this network of sort of coffee clatch conspiracy mavens. But that never materialized. But she did get on radio, and she did eventually make tapes each week she'd send out with a sheet. But she's just, I wouldn't say she's right about absolutely everything, but she was light years ahead of most people and worked, clipped 15 newspapers a day, 150 periodicals a month, and read 500 to 700 books a year, and broke all that information down. And I don't hold a candle to her, but I try to keep up, in terms of the reading. But she was brilliant, and she made the connections. And she used to say, people say I'm crazy. What they mean is I'm crazy to talk about it. And she said that she got so much vilification for talking about conspiracy. She said, well, I shouldn't do this. She said, I should say that I'm a psychic, and then everyone will love me. I'll predict Mary Jo Kopechne getting killed, and then they'll love me because I did, and I'll be like Gene Dixon.
Right.
Because Gene Dixon predicted the assassinations, all 3 of the major assassinations, John F., Robert F. Kennedy. And I used to go and get the Weekly World News each year, and especially at the end of the year, where they would predict what was happening in the coming year, and I'd put it away and take it out at the end of the next year and buy the new one, put it away, and then I'd look back, and consistently there were certain psychics that were predicting all of the covert operations and the assassinations, and were obviously being handed the information. They fed it through Milt Caniff from Air Force Intelligence, would write stuff about the, well, he started with tearing the pirates, so before you'd go into Burma, he'd be there, and he'd be in Vietnam, and then you'd go to Vietnam, and so fighting the Dragon Lady, but he was always pumping out information. And then one time he came home, and the Dayton Daily News covered him, and he said he had to cancel a whole strip and start a new one. It wasn't easy because you have to get way ahead of it, and he had to do all this extra work. And they said, well, why did you cancel the strip? And he said, well, it was a story I had about a young woman who was the daughter of a publishing figure on the West Coast being kidnapped by radicals, and I didn't want to embarrass the Hearst family when it came out. But I mean, obviously he'd been given the story, so it preconditions acceptance. And when something happens, you say, "Oh, that's what Gene Dixon said would happen," and it gives them a way to trial balloon things and put them out there without being official sources. They have novels that do that. They have movies that do that. And plant the stories. But you could see them, but Mae used to tease that way, and say that I should be a psychic, then they'd love me.